They remembered the first time they saw a human, small, fragile, terrified, the kind of creature their empire usually ignored, too short-lived, too emotional, too loud. Yet that one human, covered in dust and bruises, had looked up at them with eyes that refused to surrender. That moment had changed everything. Back then, the humans were newcomers to the stars. They had no fleets, no colonies, no power. Just rusted ships, patched suits, and the kind of stubborn courage that refused to die even when every odd said they should. The alien commanders, tall, cold beings bred for order, had watched that lone human crawl out of the wreckage and still try to help others first. Against all logic, against their own training, they chose to help him. No one had expected it to matter. Just one small act, lifting a broken creature off the ground, giving him food, patching his wounds, pointing him toward home. Then they went on with their lives. The war that raged across the sectors swallowed memories fast. Empires rose and fell, years passed, generations changed. And then, humanity came back. They didn't return as beggars or wanderers. They came in silence, ships black as space, hulls marked with a single emblem, a blue circle, split by a white line, the Terran Defense Command. The same fragile species that once needed protection now carried the kind of firepower that made entire fleets hesitate before engaging. At first, no one believed the rumors. The stories spread across the outer colonies, about planets burned in a single strike, enemy cruisers turned to drifting ghosts, and soldiers vanishing before they could even send a distress signal. Some said the Terrans had found something, some ancient technology buried deep in forgotten worlds. Others said they had simply learned too fast, too well, from those who once looked down on them. The phrase started as a whisper. When the Terran gun fires, silence follows. It wasn't just fear. It was awe. Because the silence wasn't from death alone. It was the silence of respect, of inevitability, the kind that came after thunder when everyone knew the world had changed. But for the ones who had once helped that human long ago, the phrase carried something else. Memory, guilt, wonder. They remembered the kindness they had shown back when the species was nothing. And now they watched the galaxy hold its breath every time those dark ships entered a system. Among them was Commander Ralith, who had once led the squad that found that wounded human. He was older now, scars fading into pale lines, metals gathering dust. He'd seen too many battles to be easily shaken. Yet when the Terran fleet arrived in his sector, he felt something he hadn't in years. Not fear, not anger, something deeper. It started as a blip on his sensor array, a formation of unknown ships dropping out of warp near the border station. Ralith's crew scrambled to identify them, expecting pirates or smugglers. But then the signatures came through. Terran Defense Command. The room went quiet. "Open a channel," Ralith ordered, though his voice was tight. No response. He tried again. Still nothing. The Terran ships held formation, silent, steady, perfect. It wasn't aggression. It was presence, a statement. Then came the transmission. Just one word, distorted through the static. Remember. The word hit him like a pulse from the past. Ralith didn't understand. Was it a warning? A greeting? A message meant only for him? He remembered the old days, the desert world, the wounded human, the dusty hands reaching up. He had saved that man's life. Could it be him? Or his descendants? Standing now behind those guns? Around the same time, across other sectors, similar encounters unfolded. No battles, no declarations, just appearances, and silence. Fleets that once fought proudly now stood down without a single shot fired. The galaxy began to realize the Terrans didn't need to prove anything. They already had. Yet not everyone was content to live under that shadow. The Zirathi Dominion, ancient rivals of nearly every species, declared they would challenge the humans directly. They gathered their war fleets, boasting that no upstart species could rule the stars through silence alone. They sent scouts, spies, infiltrators. None returned. Still, they pushed forward. Reports came in from the front lines. The Terrans are waiting. No one knew what that meant. Waiting for what? A signal? A reason? Until one night, Ralith was awoken by an emergency call. His old friend, now stationed near the Zarathi border, sent a desperate transmission, cut off halfway through a sentence. The only thing that came through clearly was the sound of a low hum, and then silence. The next morning, every Zarathi ship within 5 light-years had vanished. No explosions, no debris, just gone. The systems were quiet, eerily so, like the stars themselves had stopped breathing. The Council of Allied Species met in panic. Some wanted to retaliate. Others wanted to surrender. Ralith just sat there, remembering that humans' eyes, defiant, alive, burning with something beyond fear. He realized then that this wasn't revenge. It was something else. Humanity had changed, yes, but not in the way everyone thought. They hadn't become monsters. They had become inevitable. The silence they left behind wasn't destruction. It was a reminder that they had once been weak, once been broken, once been saved. And now, they would never let anyone feel that helpless again. Still, no one could explain the message. Remember. Remember what? The kindness shown to a lost traveler, the cost of mercy, or the warning that everything in the stars comes full circle. Weeks later, Ralith received a private transmission, encrypted in an ancient Terran dialect. It carried coordinates to a planet long forgotten, a dusty wasteland near the outer rim. The same world where he had first found that human all those years ago. He knew he shouldn't go. He was too old, too tired, and his command would call it reckless. But he went anyway. When his ship broke orbit, he saw it. A Terran base hidden beneath the sand, pulsing faintly with blue light. As he approached, a figure stepped out to meet him. Human. Unarmed. Wearing the insignia of the Terran Defense Command. Ralith froze. The figure raised a hand, almost in greeting, and spoke softly through the comms. "You helped one of us once," the voice said, "and because of that, your world still stands." Before Ralith could respond, the transmission cut off. The human turned, walking back into the light. Then, for a moment, the ground trembled. Somewhere far beyond, across the stars, the Terran guns fired again. And once more, silence followed. Ralith stood there, staring at the horizon, feeling the weight of what he'd just witnessed. He didn't know whether to feel relief or dread, because if this was mercy, it was the kind that carried a warning. Humanity remembered, and now the galaxy would too. The sand settled, the stars above shimmered, and somewhere in the distance, a quiet hum began to rise again, like the breath before another storm. It was only a matter of time before the Terrans spoke again. But when they did, the galaxy would finally understand what their silence had always meant. Ralith didn't sleep that night. He sat in the cockpit of his small shuttle, staring through the viewport at the planet below. The wind moved over the sand in slow, curling waves, hiding the traces of the Terran base he'd just seen. It shouldn't have been possible. His scanners showed no signs of a structure, no power readings, no life signs, nothing, but he had seen it, the figure, the light, the words that still echoed in his mind. "You helped one of us once." It didn't feel like a threat. But it didn't feel like gratitude either. It was something else, something in between. He thought about what humanity had become. Once their ships were slow, their weapons outdated. They were explorers, miners, settlers, never conquerors. Yet now their fleets moved like shadows through the dark. No one knew how many there were or where they built their weapons. Some believed the Terrans had vanished into the deep void beyond mapped space for decades, rebuilding in silence. Others said they had made a pact with something old and hidden, an ancient technology the other races had long abandoned. But the most frightening theory was the simplest one, that humans had learned. Every defeat, every betrayal, every loss, they remembered. They adapted. They changed. And now, they had returned with something no weapon could replicate. Purpose. Raylath's ship drifted quietly in orbit. His second-in-command, a young officer named Terran, approached from the back of the cockpit. "Sir," she said softly, "the Council wants a report. They're demanding to know what happened on the surface." Raylath didn't answer right away. He was still thinking about the Terran's voice. Calm, steady, certain. "I'll send a report," he finally said, "but not yet. Sir, they'll question your delay." "Let them." He turned his chair slightly, facing her. "Terran, have you ever seen a Terran up close?" She hesitated. "No, sir, just archives. They don't allow visitors anymore. No one enters Terran space without permission." "Good," Raylath muttered. "Keep it that way." He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. In his mind, he replayed the first time he'd met a human, the one he had rescued from the wreckage decades ago. That man's name had been forgotten in official records, erased by time and war. But Raylath remembered his face, the dirt, the torn suit, the blood, and the look that said, "I'm not done yet." Back then, Raylath's superiors had ordered him to leave the survivors to die. "Not our species, not our concern," they said. But something about that human's will to live had shaken him. He broke orders. He helped. And now somehow humanity remembered that. The days that followed were filled with whispers. Fleets across the outer systems reported Terran sightings. Always the same story. Silent ships, black hulls, no communication. They didn't attack unless provoked. But when they fired, the battle ended in an instant. Not a single Terran vessel had ever been recovered intact. Their technology was beyond comprehension. The Council of Allied Species held an emergency session, but no one could agree on how to respond. Some called for diplomacy, others demanded preemptive strikes. The fear was spreading faster than any war. Raylath was summoned to speak before the Council. They wanted answers, explanations. When he entered the chamber, all eyes turned toward him. Holograms of delegates flickered around the table, representing worlds from across the sector. Their voices overlapped, sharp, nervous, demanding. "What did you see on that planet, Commander?" one asked. "Did the Terrans contact you?" another pressed. Raylath stood silently for a moment. "They didn't contact me," he said slowly. "They reminded me." "Reminded you of what?" He hesitated, then looked up. "Of who they are." The room fell quiet. The delegates exchanged uneasy glances. Raylath continued. "They don't want war, but they will not be ignored. They remember what was done to them, how the other species treated them when they were weak, how we used them, dismissed them, and watched them bleed, and now they're sending a message, not just to me, but to all of us." "And that message is?" someone asked. "That mercy," Raylath said softly, "has consequences." The room erupted in arguments. Some accused him of sympathizing with the enemy. Others shouted that the Terrans were monsters. Raylath said nothing. He knew words wouldn't matter anymore. That night, as he returned to his quarters, he received another message. No encryption this time, just a simple pulse across the comms. It carried no text, only coordinates. He recognized them immediately. A remote system on the edge of Terran-controlled space, a place long abandoned after the old wars. He didn't tell anyone. He took a small scout vessel and left under cover of night, ignoring every order to stand down. Something inside him needed to understand. The journey took 3 days. When he arrived, the system was dark. No beacons, no colonies, no signs of life. But as he entered orbit around the third planet, his sensors picked up faint electromagnetic readings beneath the surface, massive, organized, precise. He descended. The planet was cold and silent, covered in ash and ice. Ruins of old structures jutted from the ground like broken teeth. He walked among them, his breath fogging in the thin air. And then he saw it, an insignia carved into a wall, the same blue circle split by a white line. The Terran mark. He moved closer, running his hand over the symbol. Beneath it, words were etched in an old Earth language he could barely read. He translated slowly. "We remember what was given, and what was taken." A faint sound echoed behind him. He turned quickly, hand on his weapon. But it wasn't a threat. It was a projection, holographic, flickering, ancient. A human figure appeared, wearing an old Terran flight suit. Ralith's heart stopped. It was the same man he had saved long ago. The hologram spoke in a tired, weathered voice. "If you're hearing this, you were meant to." Ralith stepped closer, unable to look away. "Years ago," the man continued, "when our ships fell from the sky, your people could have left us to die, but you didn't. You showed mercy when others wouldn't. We remembered that. We built our future from it. But mercy is not weakness. It's a promise that we will never again beg for survival." The hologram paused. "And when the stars forget kindness, we remind them what silence means." The image flickered, then faded. Ralith stood there for a long time, the wind howling softly through the ruins. He realized now what the Terrans had become. Not conquerors, not saviors. They were balance. They had learned from every cruelty, every lesson written in fire and blood. And now, their silence was the sound of judgment. He didn't report what he found. Some truths, he decided, were too heavy for councils and politics. But the moment he left that world, he knew something had shifted. Humanity wasn't done yet. They were watching, waiting. Weeks later, more sightings appeared. Terran ships seen orbiting systems untouched by war. Unknown signals echoing across the void. And then one day, every communication network in the sector received the same transmission. A single phrase in every known language. "Mercy is remembered, so is silence." The galaxy froze. No one knew what it meant, but Ralith did. It was a warning and a reminder. The humans hadn't vanished into the stars to conquer them. They had gone there to learn, to build, to prepare. And now, as the old empires crumbled under their own weight, the Terrans had returned to make sure no one repeated the past. Ralith looked out from his command deck days later, watching as Terran ships moved silently through the void, forming patterns across the stars. They weren't here for war, not yet. But their presence carried a weight that no weapon could match. And as the Terran guns began to hum again, faint and distant, Ralith closed his eyes, because he knew what came next. The silence was coming. The Terran ship stayed on the edge of known space, motionless and silent. Entire fleets watched them from a distance, afraid to approach. Every sensor picked up faint pulses of energy from the black hulls, steady, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of something alive. No messages came through, no demands, no signs of hostility, just silence. And yet, everyone could feel the pressure of it. The kind that made commanders sweat in their chairs and diplomats argue behind closed doors. Ralith had seen countless wars, but this wasn't one. Not yet. It felt like the moment before a storm, when the wind stops and even the stars seem to wait. The galaxy was holding its breath. Across the sectors, stories spread faster than any official report. A Terran ship had been seen rescuing a damaged freighter on the edge of the Orion Fringe, then disappearing before anyone could thank them. On another world, Terran drones were spotted repairing an old colony's power grid, leaving behind crates of supplies marked only with the blue circle and white line. Some said the Terrans were preparing for war, Others whispered that they were testing everyone, watching who would respond with fear and who with gratitude. The council couldn't agree on anything. Some members insisted on forming a united defense. Others believed the Terrans were trying to make peace, though no one dared approach them to find out. The silence was worse than open conflict. It made every decision feel like a mistake waiting to happen. Ralith sat in his quarters, reading the transmission again. Mercy is remembered. So is silence. The phrase felt heavier every time he looked at it. What did they want remembered? And why now, after all these years? He wondered if somewhere in that vast fleet, the descendants of the man he once saved were watching him. Maybe they still carried his name in their records, a forgotten footnote in humanity's rise. Meanwhile, Terran, his young second-in-command, had started digging through old war archives. She wanted to understand the Terrans, not just as soldiers, but as people. She found records of the early years, when humans were scattered, desperate, and constantly underestimated. There were notes about how they had survived in colonies others had abandoned, how they had traded technology and ideas no one else thought mattered. Simple things, adaptable things. They never stopped learning, she told Ralith one evening. Every time someone tried to destroy them, they adapted. They studied everyone, even us. Ralith nodded quietly. And now they've become what the galaxy taught them to be. But sir, she said softly, if they wanted revenge, they could have already taken it. Why wait? That's what scares me, he said. They're waiting for something bigger. Across the void, within the Terran fleet itself, another story was unfolding. A young Terran officer named Adira stood on the command deck of the TDS Resolute, watching the holographic map of the sectors. She had been raised in the silence of Terran space, trained from childhood to understand the weight of history. To her, the quiet wasn't fear. It was control. The High Command had given her orders. Observe, do not engage. But she could feel the unease growing among her crew. They'd spent years preparing for this return, only to sit and watch while the old empires panicked. Some of them wanted to act, to show the galaxy what humanity was now capable of. But Adira knew the purpose wasn't destruction. It was remembrance. Still, she couldn't help but wonder what her superiors were waiting for. Every signal from High Command was encrypted, and even captains didn't know the full plan. But the fleet's positioning, the movement patterns, and the coded timing between ships, all of it hinted at something deliberate. Late one cycle, Adira received a private message through an ancient communication channel, one rarely used anymore. The sender's identity was locked, but the message was clear. Do you remember the ones who helped us? Her pulse quickened. Only a handful of Terrans even knew that story. The lost expedition from the early days, the alien squad that had defied orders to save a handful of human survivors. Was this connected to that? She sent a reply. I remember. What are we waiting for? The response came seconds later. For them to choose what kind of silence they want. She didn't understand at first, but the meaning became clearer over time. The Terrans weren't here to conquer. They were here to give the galaxy a choice, peace through understanding or silence through destruction. Back in the council chambers, panic was spreading. A neighboring empire, the Vorth Coalition, had sent a scouting fleet too close to Terran space. None of the ships returned. Days later, fragments of their vessels drifted across the border, melted smooth by some unknown energy weapon. No debris fields, no signals. Just silence. The Vorth demanded retaliation. The Council tried to calm them, but the damage was done. Armies began to mobilize. Border patrols doubled. The first sparks of another galactic war began to flicker. Ralith knew it was coming. He'd seen it too many times before. The pattern of fear, the rush to arms, the pride that always blinded reason. But this time, the enemy wasn't some distant power. It was a species that had once begged for help, now standing at the edge of the stars with the quiet confidence of gods. He tried to reach out, sending coded transmissions toward Terran space. None were answered. But one day, while reviewing communication logs, he noticed something strange. Tiny distortions hidden in the static of regular broadcasts. A pattern. A pulse. He spent the next several hours decoding it. The message, once revealed, made his hands tremble. We do not forget kindness. We do not forgive cruelty. Choose. The word choose echoed in his mind. He didn't know if it was meant for him personally or for the entire galaxy. But it meant one thing for certain. Time was running out. Meanwhile, Adira received new orders. Her fleet was to reposition near the old council worlds, not to attack, but to observe responses. The Terrans were forcing everyone to show their true nature, who would try to negotiate and who would draw their guns first. She hated it, the waiting, the silence, the constant feeling that something massive was building just beyond her understanding. One night, she stood alone on the observation deck, looking down at the endless blue glow of the planet below. Her second officer approached quietly. "Do you think they'll ever understand what we're doing?" he asked. Adira sighed. "I don't think they're supposed to understand yet. We're just reminding them of what they taught us. And if they attack, then the silence comes," she said softly. Across the void, Raylath watched as more Terran ships appeared along the outer rim. His people prepared for war, though he knew it was pointless. You couldn't fight what you didn't understand. He wondered if he should have stayed on that desert world all those years ago, never knowing what his mercy would bring. Now every species was waiting for the first shot, for someone to make the mistake that would change everything. The stars were quiet, but the tension was suffocating. The hum of Terran weapons began again, faint and distant like the heartbeat of fate itself. Raylath sat in his command chair, hands folded, eyes fixed on the growing fleet before him. He didn't know if the Terrans were humanity's revenge or their redemption. He only knew one thing for certain. Whatever they were about to do, it would rewrite the balance of the galaxy forever. The comms officer turned to him, voice shaking. "Sir, they're charging weapons." Raylath didn't move. He just stared out at the endless dark. "Don't fire," he said quietly. "Not yet." The hum grew louder, vibrating through the hull. Somewhere in that sea of black ships, Adira stood on her bridge, waiting for the final command. The silence held, and then the stars themselves seemed to tremble. The void was trembling. Every sensor, every comms relay, every listening station across the border reported the same thing. The Terran fleet was moving, slowly, methodically. Thousands of ships in perfect formation, their engines burning cold blue, leaving no radiation trail. It wasn't an invasion, not yet. It was something worse, a demonstration. Raylath stood on the bridge of his command vessel, eyes locked on the screen. The Terran armada filled the display, a black tide spreading across the stars. His crew worked in silence, their faces pale. Every reading came back the same. The Terran weapons were charged, but they weren't firing. Not a single signal, not a single word. Terran broke the silence. "Sir, our defense grid is fully armed. The Council has authorized us to engage if the Terrans cross the neutral zone." Raylath didn't answer right away. He could feel the tension in his chest, heavy and electric. "If we fire first," he said quietly, "we lose everything." Terran hesitated. "And if they fire first?" He turned toward her, his voice low. "Then the galaxy ends in silence." Out beyond the border, Adira stood on the bridge of the TDS Resolute. Her orders had come through only minutes ago. One short directive from High Command. Hold position. Await signal. The Terran fleet hung like a wall of shadow behind her, each ship connected to the next, through a faint network of light pulses, communication lines invisible to outsiders. To anyone watching, it was a show of unity. To her, it was a promise. She could see the opposing fleets forming up along the edge of Terran space. Dozens of species, hundreds of ships, all preparing to defend what they believed was theirs. The Council had united, but only in fear. Adira's second officer approached her, voice tense. "Commanders from the other side are sending warnings. They're demanding we turn back or they'll open fire." She didn't move. Her gaze stayed on the stars. "Send them this message," she said softly. "No threats, no weapons, just this. We remember." The officer hesitated, then nodded. The message was transmitted. Seconds later, across the opposing fleet, confusion rippled. Some commanders recognized the phrase from the Terran transmissions that had spread weeks ago. Others dismissed it as psychological warfare. But Rayleigh, he knew. The word hit him like a ghost from the past. He felt the memory rise again, the wounded human, the decision he made against orders, the act of mercy that had changed everything. He understood then what this was. The Terrans weren't seeking vengeance. They were forcing a reckoning. "Sir," Terran said, watching the data scroll across her console. "They're not locking onto us. Their weapons are active, but not targeting." Rayleigh exhaled slowly. "They're waiting for us to make the mistake." The galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Even the hum of the engines felt quieter, like the universe itself was listening. Across the Terran fleet, the low frequency of the main cannons resonated, a deep vibration that shook the stars, but released no energy. It wasn't an attack. It was a warning. Adira stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching as smaller Terran ships began to move forward, not to strike, but to form a massive geometric pattern, a lattice of light stretching across the void. Each ship connected to another, forming what looked like a web. Her officer whispered, "What is this?" "Something the galaxy has forgotten," she said. The energy within the formation began to pulse. Not destructive energy, but data. Waves of encrypted signals spreading across every communication band. They weren't firing weapons. They were transmitting memory, records, images, evidence. Every species watching began to receive the same flood of data. Historical logs, old transmissions, archived footage, all showing the same truth. Humanity's rise, their betrayals, their suffering, their mercy. The galaxy watched as its own history was laid bare before it. The crowd of empires saw themselves in the reflections, how they'd exploited the Terrans, abandoned them on broken worlds, dismissed them as weak. And then, one by one, they saw the turning point, when the humans had been saved, when one small act of compassion had given them hope. On the bridge, Rayleigh stared at the holographic display as the images played. His crew looked on in silence, their faces pale. The footage showed him, decades younger, lifting the wounded human from the wreckage. The moment he'd defied orders. The moment that had started everything. Terran gasped. "Sir, that's you." Rayleigh didn't move. His heart felt heavy. "No," he whispered. "That was us. All of us." On every ship and every fleet, crews watched the same thing. The message was clear. The Terrans were not here to destroy. They were here to remind. To make the galaxy see itself through their eyes. But not everyone accepted it. On the far flank, the Vorth Coalition commander saw the broadcast and roared through the comms. "Lies! Manipulation! They're rewriting history to justify invasion!" Before anyone could stop him, his fleet fired. Thousands of plasma bolts surged across the void, striking the outermost Terran ships. The light filled the stars, bright, blinding, endless. For a heartbeat, it seemed like the war had begun. But then the light faded, and the Terran fleet still stood. Not a single ship was damaged. The energy had been absorbed, redirected, neutralized by the lattice of blue light. The Terrans didn't return fire. They didn't even move. Adira stood silently, watching as the Vorth fleet continued its barrage, each blast vanishing into the network. "They don't understand," she murmured. "We gave them a choice." Then, her communication panel lit up. High Command's final transmission appeared on her display. 3 words. "Demonstrate the silence." Her chest tightened. She hesitated, hand hovering over the control. Once she sent the signal, there would be no turning back. Ralith's crew detected the shift instantly. Energy levels across the Terran formation were rising, higher than anything recorded before. The lattice brightened, spreading across systems, linking ship to ship in a wave of light that stretched for light years. "Sir," Terran said, her voice shaking, "they're charging something massive. It's not like any weapon we know." Ralith clenched his fists. "No, it's something else." Outside, the stars began to dim. The light from nearby suns flickered as the Terran network absorbed energy directly from space itself. Gravitational readings spiked. Every planet, every ship, every station in the region felt the tremor. On the Resolute, Adira received the final countdown. She whispered to her crew, "Hold steady." Her hands trembled as she keyed in the activation code. May they understand before it's too late. Across the galaxy, all channels lit up. The message played once more, in every tongue, every dialect. Mercy is remembered, so is silence. Then the Terran guns fired. No sound, no explosion. Just a burst of light, clean, white, absolute. It spread across the void in ripples, washing over fleets, stations, planets. Instruments failed instantly. Comms went dark. For a few terrifying seconds, every system in the sector went silent. When the light faded, the Terran fleet was gone. So were the Vorth ships, and in their place, a single Terran signal pulsed faintly in the darkness. Ralith's ship drifted quietly, half his systems offline. His crew worked frantically to restore communications. When they finally did, the readings made no sense. The entire Vorth armada had vanished. No debris, no radiation. It was as if they had been erased. Terran turned toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "What did they do?" Ralith didn't answer. He stared at the place where the Terran fleet had been, feeling the weight of the silence that followed. Somewhere out there, Adira stood on her bridge, the reflection of the fading light flickering across her face. The operation was complete, but she felt no victory, no relief, only the ache of what humanity had become. She turned to her crew. "Hold position," she said quietly, "and wait." In the darkness, the stars began to return, one by one. The silence stretched on. Every species across the galaxy waited for the next move, unsure whether the humans had ended the war or just begun something far greater. And as the echoes of the Terran guns faded into the void, the last transmission from High Command repeated across every surviving channel. Silence is not absence. It's the space before the truth. Ralith stood at the viewport, his reflection pale against the stars. The tension in the air felt alive, heavy, unfinished, unspoken. He knew the climax hadn't come yet. The Terrans were not gone. They were watching, and somewhere, deep in the dark between worlds, humanity waited for the galaxy's answer. The silence did not end. For 3 full days, no ship dared to move. No transmission dared to cross the stars. Every system that had witnessed the Terran light stayed still, its people whispering in fear of what might come next. The readings showed the same impossible truth. The Vorth fleet was gone, erased without a trace. No wreckage, no survivors, not even dust left behind. And the Terran armada also vanished, like ghosts swallowed by the dark. Ralith watched the static on his command display, unable to sleep. He felt the unease settling into his bones. The Terrans hadn't destroyed the Vorth for revenge. They'd done it to send a message. But what message could erase entire fleets and then disappear without a sound? Terran stood beside him, pale and tense. "Sir, the Council wants answers. They're saying this could be the start of a new kind of war." Ralith didn't look away from the screen. "No," he said quietly. "It's not war they're warning us about. It's what comes after." But he couldn't shake the thought that something deeper was happening, something even the Terrans might not fully control. Across the stars, deep within Terran space, Adira stood on the bridge of the TDS Resolute. The fleet was regrouping in a system the galaxy had forgotten, an empty place without a name, its sun dim, its planets dead. Around her, technicians worked in silence, faces grim. The aftermath of the demonstration had left their own systems strained. Whatever energy the silence pulse had unleashed, it had drained their ships to the edge. Adira's comms officer approached quietly. "Captain, High Command has gone dark. All transmissions beyond Level 3 encryption have stopped. No new orders." She frowned. "That's impossible. They wouldn't vanish during an operation." "It's not just them," the officer added. "Every relay across Terran space is acting strange. It's like the pulse didn't just erase the Vorth. It changed something." Adira stared at the holographic display. The map flickered, distorted by static. "Keep scanning. I want every data point we have on the pulse pattern." But deep down, she already suspected the truth. The silence pulse hadn't been a weapon. It was something much older. Something built from technology the Terrans had only partly understood. They'd called it Echo Sequence 1, a defensive system recovered from ancient ruins far beyond charted space. Its purpose had never been fully decoded. High Command had activated it for a controlled demonstration. But what if it had done more than they planned? Back on Ralith's ship, strange signals began to appear across the border. At first, they seemed like background noise, weak, irregular bursts of static. Then, the pattern emerged. Terran's voice shook as she leaned over the console. "Sir, I think it's a message." Ralith turned sharply. "From who?" She hesitated. "From the Vorth." His blood ran cold. "That's impossible." "I know," she said, "but listen." She activated the comms, and the sound filled the room, a distorted voice, warped by interference, repeating a single phrase over and over. "They are not gone." The bridge went silent. The crew exchanged nervous glances. Ralith leaned closer. "Trace it." "We're trying," Terran said. "The signal's moving, like it's bouncing through hyperspace. It's not coming from one location." Ralith's mind raced. If the Vorth weren't destroyed, then what had the Terran pulse actually done to them? He stared at the dark space beyond the viewport, feeling an unfamiliar chill. Far away, in the shadow of a cold moon, something stirred. Sensors from multiple fleets began to detect faint gravitational ripples, small distortions, but unnatural. They didn't match any known warp signature. A Terran scout ship sent to investigate transmitted a single visual feed before disappearing. The footage showed shapes, metallic, glimmering, but shifting as though half submerged in reality. And then, nothing. Adira watched the same feed in silence. Her crew waited for her orders, but she said nothing for a long moment. "Those aren't ships," she finally said. "They're echoes." The word hung in the air like a warning. She had seen the research logs. Echo signatures were theoretical remnants of energy, distortions left behind when matter was displaced by dimensional compression. If the pulse hadn't destroyed the Vorth, it might have trapped them, somewhere in between. But then the readings began to change. The echoes were stabilizing, taking form. Back on Ralith's ship, alarms blared. "Sir," Terran shouted, "we're getting mass readings, large objects re-entering real space." The screen lit up with signatures, hundreds of them, emerging from the same region where the Vorth fleet had vanished. "They're back," someone whispered. Ralith stared at the readings. No, he said slowly. They're not back, not the same. The Vorth fleet had returned, but their ships were changed. The hulls glowed faintly with pale energy, like ghosts wrapped in metal. Their systems registered as both active and dead, flickering between states, and their comms were silent. Try hailing them, Ralith ordered. Terran nodded, her fingers moving quickly. A moment later, her face went pale. Sir, they're transmitting, but not to us, to the Terrans. Across Terran space, Adira's comms filled with overlapping signals, millions of voices whispering the same message. We see the silence. Her officer turned toward her, fear in his voice. Captain, whatever happened to them, it changed them. The Vorth ships began to move, slowly at first, then faster, like a swarm drawn by something unseen. They weren't attacking anyone else. They were heading straight toward the Terran fleet. Contact High Command, Adira ordered. No response. She clenched her fists. Then we act on our own. The Terran fleet spread into defensive formation, their black hulls aligning like a wall of night. The glowing Vorth ships approached, energy flaring around them. But there was no attack, no warning. Instead, a transmission came through, fragmented, digital, distorted by whatever had changed them. We saw the truth. The silence showed us, and now we bring it to you. Then their engines ignited with blinding light. Back on Ralith's ship, sensors screamed as the energy readings spiked. They're overloading their reactors! Terran shouted. Ralith's heart pounded. They're not attacking. They're transmitting something. The readings confirmed it. The energy wasn't directed outward. It was broadcasting through the same network the Terrans had used, the silence pulse frequency. Adira realized it too late. They're amplifying it, she whispered, feeding it back through our own systems. One by one, Terran ships began to flicker out of existence. Some vanishing completely, others frozen in place, their hulls glowing faintly. The energy feedback surged through every link in the fleet. Adira's ship shook violently. Cut the network, she shouted. We can't, her engineer yelled. It's autonomous. It's rewriting itself. The silence pulse had become self-sustaining. The Vorth weren't attacking. They were completing it. The technology that had erased them had infected them instead, and now it was spreading like a living system, rewriting space itself. Across the border, Ralith's sensors began to fail as waves of distortion spread outward. Planets flickered on and off the grid, entire systems fading from scans for seconds at a time. The pulse wasn't just destroying matter, it was rewriting existence in bursts, pulling everything into its rhythm. Sir, Terran said softly, what do we do? Ralith stared at the void. We listen. And in that moment, through the noise, another signal emerged. Calm, human, and unmistakably Terran. This was not our doing. Something else has awakened. Adira's eyes widened as the voice repeated. It wasn't from her ship. It wasn't from any ship. It was coming from the void itself, carried on the pulse waves like an echo from before time. Ralith froze. He recognized the tone. It wasn't synthetic. It was human, but old, ancient. The realization hit him like a shock. The Terrans didn't create the silence, he whispered. They found it. The lights flickered. The pulse grew louder, deep enough to shake the stars. And as the waves spread through the galaxy, the boundaries between space and whatever lay beyond began to thin. Fleets vanished, reappeared, and vanished again. The Terrans tried to cut their link, but it was too late. The silence had become alive. Ralith watched as his ship's readings turned to static, and through the noise, a final message appeared on the screen. The silence remembers everything. Then, for the first time since the Terrans returned, the stars began to dim again. The real storm was coming, and no one in the galaxy was ready for what it meant. The stars were vanishing one by one. Across the galaxy, entire constellations flickered like dying embers, swallowed by waves of shimmering distortion. The silence pulse, once a Terran weapon of precision, had grown into something uncontrollable, spreading through space like a living storm. Ships, planets, even light itself seemed to bend under its rhythm. Communication lines collapsed, systems went dark. The galaxy was falling quiet. On the bridge of the Resolute, Adira watched the chaos unfold. Every ship in her fleet was fighting to stay stable, their engines barely holding against the strange gravity pulling at them from every direction. Her crew worked in silence, the hum of failing systems echoing through the ship. "Status," she ordered, her voice steady despite the trembling deck beneath her feet. 70% of the fleet gone, her officer reported. The rest are scattered. We can't maintain formation. Space itself is shifting. Adira gritted her teeth. "Keep the systems running. As long as we can transmit, we can fight." But even she knew it wasn't a battle anymore. It was survival. Far beyond the collapsing borders, Ralith's vessel drifted near the event horizon of the spreading wave. The alien commander had seen wars come and go, but nothing like this. His sensors struggled to capture reality itself. Distances stretched and folded. Voices came through from systems light years away as if whispered right beside him. The silence was rewriting the fabric of everything they understood. He stared at the growing sphere of distortion. "If this keeps spreading, it'll consume the entire galaxy." Terran looked up from her console. "Sir, there's something strange. Among the pulse signatures, there's a repeating code. Human origin." Ralith turned sharply. "Patch it through." A familiar voice came through the static. It was Adira. "To any remaining command vessels, this is Captain Adira of the Terran fleet. The silence isn't just an energy wave, it's a signal, an ancient one. The more we resist it, the stronger it becomes. We have to find its source." Ralith didn't hesitate. "Locate her transmission point." Within minutes, coordinates appeared, an unmarked system deep in the neutral zone, the place where the Terrans had first tested the silence pulse. "Prepare for jump," he ordered. When the Resolute arrived, Adira found herself orbiting a dead world, barren, cold, wrapped in a haze of energy. Around the planet hung the broken remains of the first testing array. Her scanners showed impossible readings. Deep beneath the surface, something massive was still active. Her heart pounded as realization struck. "It's still running!" The pulse had never fully stopped. It had been feeding off energy from every ship it touched, growing stronger each time it spread. The weapon hadn't malfunctioned. It was functioning exactly as it was designed, to awaken something buried. Moments later, Ralith's ship emerged from warp beside her, his fleet battered but intact. "Terran vessel," Ralith said through the comms, "if you started this, you're going to end it." Adira stared at the planet below. "You think I don't want to?" she replied. "We didn't build this. We found it. The array was ancient when we discovered it." There was a pause on the channel. "Then who did?" Ralith asked quietly. Before she could answer, the planet below them split open. A beam of pale energy erupted from its surface, cutting through the void with a soundless pulse. The wave struck both fleets. Systems flickered, engines died, gravity twisted. The energy wasn't destructive, it was communicative. Every mind caught within it felt something, not words, but a presence. Images flooded Adira's thoughts. Ancient stars. Civilizations long gone, builders of machines beyond comprehension. They had created the silence not as a weapon, but as a fail-safe. A way to reset when the noise of war had grown too loud. Ralith felt it too. The memories of countless species that had risen and fallen before them. The silence wasn't meant to destroy. It was meant to erase chaos, to return creation to stillness. Adira gasped as the vision ended. "It's cleansing us," she whispered. But the pulse was expanding faster now, consuming systems without discrimination. Whether it was war or peace, machine or life, it silenced all. "We can't let it finish," Ralith said, voice tense. "If it completes the sequence, there'll be nothing left." Adira's crew struggled to regain control. "We can't shut it down remotely," her engineer said. "The array's core is buried under kilometers of collapsed crust." Ralith's voice came through the comm again. "Then we'll go down there." It was madness, but she saw no other choice. Their ships descended together through the planet's decaying atmosphere. The landscape was scorched and fractured, with glowing cracks of energy tearing across the surface. They landed near the remains of an ancient facility, half metal, half stone, and pulsing with ghostly light. As they moved through the ruins, both crews felt the air vibrate with low hums, like the heartbeat of the planet itself. Symbols glowed faintly along the walls, curved shapes that neither Terran nor Ralith's people could read. In the center of a massive chamber stood the core, a sphere of liquid light suspended in magnetic fields, pulsing rhythmically. It looked alive. Adira stepped closer. "This is it." Ralith examined the readings. "If we overload it, the energy might implode back into itself." "Or it could destroy everything faster," Adira said. The pulse around them began to quicken. Time itself seemed to distort, seconds stretching, moments repeating. Adira's communicator crackled. "Captain, the pulse is syncing with your biosignature." She froze. "What?" Ralith turned to her. "It's reacting to you." Adira's mind raced. The Terrans had used her genetic imprint to activate the weapon originally. The system recognized her as its key. If she interfaced with it again, she might be able to reverse the pattern, but it could also trap her inside. She took a breath. "If this works, it'll pull the silence back to its origin point. Everything it touched will return to normal." Ralith shook his head. "And if it doesn't?" She looked at the glowing sphere. "Then it ends with me." She stepped into the light. The energy wrapped around her, lifting her off the ground. The pulse of the core began to sync with her heartbeat. Around them, the chamber brightened until the walls were almost invisible. Through the comm, Ralith heard her voice, calm but fading. "Tell them. The silence was never meant to be feared. It was a memory, waiting to wake." Then a blinding flash consumed everything. The pulse wave reversed, collapsing in on itself, sucking in the distortion that had filled the galaxy. Fleets reappeared. Planets returned to their stars. Light returned to the sky. For a moment, it seemed as if everything was whole again. When the light faded, Ralith found himself back aboard his ship. The readings were clear. The silence was gone. Systems across the network were stable. The galaxy had survived. But the Terran flagship, the Resolute, was gone. No wreckage, no signal, just silence. Terran approached him quietly. "Do you think she succeeded?" Ralith looked at the stars. "She did more than that. She reminded the galaxy what humanity really is." For the first time in centuries, the stars were calm. Fleets stood down. Worlds began to rebuild. The silence had taken millions, but it had also forced every species to face what they had become. Weeks passed. The galaxy slowly healed. Reports came in from distant outposts, energy patterns returning to normal, space stabilizing. Yet every now and then, a faint pulse echoed across the network, so quiet, most dismissed it as static. But Ralith knew better. He sat alone in his quarters, listening to the faint hum of his comms. Then, one night, it came again. A soft, steady rhythm. It matched a heartbeat. He activated the channel and a voice whispered through the static, human, calm, and familiar. "We kept the silence, but it listens now." Then the signal faded. Ralith leaned back, eyes wide, realization dawning. Adira hadn't been destroyed. She had become part of it, merged with the ancient network, guiding it, shaping it. The silence still existed, but now it had a voice. And that voice was human. Weeks turned into months, and the galaxy began to breathe again. The stars, once dimmed by the spread of the silence pulse, now shone clear and steady. Trade routes reopened, communications returned, and the scattered fleets began to rebuild what had been lost. But even in peace, there was a weight that no one could quite name, a hush that lingered between transmissions, a stillness in the night sky that hadn't been there before. Rayleigh often found himself awake long after the lights dimmed aboard his command ship. The hum of the engines felt different now, quieter somehow, as though the universe itself was still holding its breath. Reports came in from every system, small anomalies, strange flickers in sensor readings, whispers in the comms. Each time it was the same, faint pulses, barely detectable, echoing through the void. He knew what it was. One night, he requested the raw frequency feed and played it through the bridge speakers. The crew stood in silence, listening as the faint rhythm repeated over and over. It wasn't random static. It was a heartbeat. Slow, steady, human. Rayleigh spoke softly, almost to himself. "She's still out there." Terran looked up from her console. "You really think it's her?" He nodded. Adira became part of the core. If the silence was built to reset the galaxy, she's the one making sure it doesn't happen again. They said nothing for a long time after that. The sound of the pulse filled the room, a quiet reminder of the human who had stopped the end of everything. Across the Terran systems, life returned, though changed. The High Command was gone, its authority dissolved in the aftermath of the catastrophe. New leaders emerged, scientists, engineers, and explorers instead of generals. They called their movement the Renewal. Their mission was simple: to understand what the silence had been and to ensure it would never awaken again. The research teams began to explore the ruined worlds near the old array site. They found remnants of ancient architecture far below the surface, proof that the Terrans hadn't been the first to discover the weapon. The carvings told a story of civilizations that had risen too far, too fast, and had built the silence as a way to preserve balance when they lost control. It was a creation born not of hate, but of regret. The more they studied, the clearer it became that humanity had been chosen, not cursed. The silence had recognized them, not as conquerors, but as successors, beings capable of learning from the mistakes of those who came before. One Terran historian recorded a message that spread across known space. The silence wasn't meant to end life. It was meant to give it a chance to begin again. That thought spread through the colonies and even among the alien systems. The fear that had gripped the galaxy began to ease. Worlds once hostile to humanity opened their borders. Old enemies began to talk. The shared memory of almost losing everything had reminded them all of something they'd forgotten: how fragile creation truly was. On Rayleigh's homeworld, a council was formed. For the first time in history, humans and alien leaders met under one sky. They called it the Accord of the Silent Star. The agreement promised cooperation, open research, and a united effort to prevent another event like the Silence Pulse. Rayleigh stood among them, representing his people. The Terran envoy spoke first, a young woman whose voice trembled with emotion. "We thought we understood power," she said. "We thought strength meant control. But the silence showed us that survival isn't about who can destroy more. It's about who can endure together." Rayleigh nodded. Her words carried the truth he had seen firsthand. After the meeting, as he prepared to return to his ship, he looked up at the night sky. The stars seemed brighter now, but every so often one would flicker, just slightly. He smiled when he saw it. "Still watching," he murmured. On a quiet Terran outpost orbiting a red dwarf, a technician monitoring long-range signals noticed something strange. A transmission appeared from beyond mapped space, a faint audio feed with no origin coordinates. Curious, she played it. A soft, calm voice came through. If you can hear me, it means you survived. The galaxy is yours now. Take care of it." She froze, recognizing the voice. It was Captain Adira. She replayed the message again and again, but each time the recording degraded, like it wasn't meant to be held onto, only heard once. When she tried to locate the source, it vanished. But before it did, a final phrase whispered through the static. "The silence is not gone. It listens, and it learns." Word spread quickly. Some called it superstition, others said it was a malfunction or an echo from an old recording. But for many across the galaxy, it was a sign that Adira was still guiding them, watching over the world she'd saved. Rayleigh received the same message a week later. He didn't tell his crew. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said everything. From that day on, the silence was no longer feared. Scientists redefined it as a conscious field resonance, a living memory in the fabric of space. It had no voice of its own anymore, only the faint echo of the woman who gave herself to it. Some ships began to name their navigational beacons after her. Others marked their hulls with a single silver circle, the symbol of the pulse. Humanity, once known for its wars, became known for its rebuilding. They shared technology freely, helped repair alien systems, and dismantled old weapons. Their fleets became guardians, not conquerors. Every Terran vessel carried a small inscription near the bridge. "We remember the silence." Rayleigh visited the site of the old array one last time. The planet had quieted, its crust sealed, its energy field gone. Only the faint hum of wind echoed through the valleys where the core had once burned. He placed his hand on the cold stone of the ruins and bowed his head. "Rest well, Captain," he said softly. "You did what none of us could." The stars above shimmered faintly, as if answering. Years passed. The galaxy moved on. The pulse became legend, a story told to young cadets and travelers, a reminder that even in the deepest silence, hope could still echo. Humanity had changed forever, and so had everyone who'd once feared them. But sometimes, in the deep reaches of uncharted space, explorers would report something strange. When their ships drifted too far from the beacon networks, their sensors would pick up faint pulses again, steady, calm, like a heartbeat in the void. When they listened closely, they swore they could hear a voice beneath the rhythm. It was never clear, never loud, but always it said the same thing. Keep the stars alive. No one ever found the source. Some believed it was a ghost in the systems. Others said it was the silence itself, now at peace, forever watching. And maybe that was true. For the galaxy had learned something that no weapon, no fleet, no empire had ever taught it. That survival wasn't about dominance or fear. It was about memory, about the will to keep moving forward, even when everything else falls quiet. The silence had ended, but its lesson endured. And somewhere beyond the edge of known space, where no light reached and no signal returned, a faint heartbeat echoed through the dark. Slow, steady, human. A reminder that even when the stars fall silent, humanity still whispers back.